The Tonale is Alfa Romeo's first plug-in hybrid, and that's exactly what we have on review today. Now, prices start from £44,500 for the Speciale, which is a launch edition as such, and then you've also got the TI, which starts from roughly £46,000, and then you've got the top-of-the-range Veloce, which starts from roughly £48,500, of course, without any additional options, such as this magnificent paint finish. Now, in this review, you can see how it compares to some of its alternatives and to see if it's actually worth its asking price. So jumping straight in, let's talk about the Tonale plug-in hybrid's performance because, well, it's an Alfa Romeo after all. Now, at the front of the vehicle, you have a 1.3 litre four-cylinder petrol engine, which combines with a 90 kilowatt electric motor that's at the rear of the vehicle to output a total of 206 kilowatts or 280 horsepower. You have also got 270 newton meters of torque. A fun fact that if you were to actually operate for just the rear electric motor, you still have 250 newton meters of torque and a top speed of 84 miles an hour. This goes up to around 124 miles an hour if you were to enable the petrol engine by opting for one of the other drive modes. Now here I actually had it tested from 0 to 60 miles an hour using RaceLogic's Performance Box Touch at 6.38 seconds, and going from 50 to 70 miles an hour I clocked it in at 2.91 seconds. So therefore it's certainly no slouch when you put your foot down to the metal, but isn't exactly going to be that exhilarating. Now let me also expand on that point. Right now we're on its natural preset, which therefore gives it a somewhat balanced driving dynamics, but I'm going to go on to its dynamic mode preset, which favors the engine, stiffens up the steering input and actually reduces the brake travel by roughly around 20% and therefore meaning that you just feel a little bit more connected. Now if I were to put my foot down by going by 35 miles an hour to roughly 60 miles an hour, you can hear the engine really kicking into life and those revs going up to around 4,500 to 5,000. Indeed, it really does struggle when it comes to having that extra bit of input, and you can always hear it, specifically if you're going up a hill. Now don't get me wrong, this is for people who are going to be a little bit, well, driving a bit more in a spirited way and potentially going around windy country roads, but for an Alfa Romeo, I actually expected a slightly bigger or beefier engine and one that could actually do a little bit better without having to need to use the electric motor in order to deliver its maximum performance. Speaking of which, let's talk about the vehicle's handling characteristics. And here the Tonale plug-in hybrid has got quite an interesting setup. You have got a electric motor which is planted at the rear of the vehicle, and when you go for the advanced efficiency mode, it will effectively permanently engage the rear wheel drive system. However, if you were to go for one of the other modes, it will enable the engine and therefore operate on an EAWD system. Now, the engine is not mechanically connected with the rear wheel drive, and therefore why you have got an EAWD system rather than a traditional all-wheel drive system. It's quite interesting to say the least, but effectively it does its job. When required, you've got that extra bit of traction and indeed have got a bit of extra power, because when you're putting down your foot down to the metal, you have got the engine and the electric motor working in tandem. But then when you are just pottering around town and therefore favoring the fully electric mode, it's going to be operating on a rear wheel drive. If, however, you want that increased amount of performance and you're wanting a little bit of that extra punch to it, then it's going to favor a front wheel drive system and then engage the rear wheel drive system, therefore EAWD, when required. Hopefully that makes sense, but it's certainly baffling to say the least and different from a lot of the alternatives out there on the market. Now, as for its driving dynamics as such, the steering wheel does feel a little bit disjointed in comparison to some of the rival alternatives. Nonetheless, it still does incite plenty of fun when you're putting your foot down to the metal on windy country roads, and that is in part due to the fact that it has a curb weight of just 1,910 kilograms, so you're still getting that Alfa Romeo feel in an SUV. Now, aside from this, the vehicle on review is the Veloce trim, and therefore, as standard, has got a dual-stage valve suspension system. It certainly is good, although won't compete with adaptive air suspension systems, but it is quite dynamic, and therefore, if you're going into its dynamic mode preset, then you will actually find that it does actually adapt pretty well and gives you that sort of heightened experience, further emphasizing the point that you're going to have a lot of fun while driving the Tonale plug-in hybrid. Now, it's worth pointing out that the DSV system can be added for an additional £800 in the Speciale trim, but is not available at all in the regular TI trim. Now, I would also like to point out that this has got a 6-speed automatic transmission, which is very good and buttery smooth, although you can adjust it on the fly if you so wish via the gear selector by shifting it to the left-hand side, as you would do on most vehicles, or by initiating via these oversized flappy paddles. They're metallic and clunky and certainly feel the part, but you might have thought that Alfa Romeo could have come up with a slightly smaller or sleeker design. Nonetheless, other than the aesthetics, it actually does feel really nice, so I've got no sort of inherent complaints. Now, while that's all very good, what about when it comes to the all-important efficiency? Well, here the manufacturer, very much like some of the others out there, claims a ridiculous 188 to 217 MPG. This is actually far from the truth, and from my own mixed driving tests, which are actually quite spirited, I netted 48 miles per gallon. Now, in comparison to some of the sportier plug-in hybrids out there, this actually does fare pretty well. And therefore, if you're considering the plug-in hybrid over the MHEV, then you might actually seriously want to shortlist it, because the overall fuel efficiency that one can gain is very impressive. Furthermore, if you can combine that with shorter distance trips, so for example, this has got an electric range that ranges between 30 to 38 miles, it means that you can really bolster that overall MPG figure and potentially refuel a little bit less. Speaking of which, you have got a 42.5 litre fuel tank, which should net you around 300 miles without having to stop to refuel. At least, of course, depending on how you drive and where you drive. So you might be wondering what happens when you run out of charge. Well, in order to replenish its 15.5 kilowatt hour battery pack, you have actually got a 7.4 kilowatt onboard charger, which is absolutely fantastic to see. So therefore, via the Type 2 port, which can be found over here towards the rear of the vehicle, you can plug it in and go from 0 to 100% in roughly 2.5 hours. If, however, you have only access to a regular 3-pin socket, it will take you roughly 5.5 hours. All worthwhile considering, but it's great to see that the manufacturer has actually incorporated a higher capacity onboard charger, therefore making it quite convenient when you're out and about. So moving swiftly on, let's talk about its interior design. And given Alfa Romeo has got its Italian DNA, it's no surprise here to see that the stitching work, the upholstery, and even the choice of materials around the dashboard are actually pretty nice. And yes, it won't compete with some of the more premium alternatives out there on the market, but given its price point and the segment, it certainly does look the part. Now, I also do love the practicality of this vehicle. I did touch upon those very oversized flappy paddles, which have got that clicky feel, but apart from that, you have got physical buttons. So yes, it hasn't gone all touch based or capacitive based as like you would find on some of the more modern alternatives. Indeed, here you've got physical buttons planted on the steering wheel. You even got the start stop button found just on it as well. Towards the dashboard, you have got a flurry of climate control buttons, which are great, but of course you can complement this with the touch-based input on the infotainment system. And then towards the center console, it's intuitively laid out with a gear selector. No complaints whatsoever when it comes to practicality. Now, what about when it comes to the use of technology? Well, here it's actually still very impressive. Across the entire trim range, you'll have a 10.25-inch display that's planted at the center of the dashboard. It's extremely responsive, although its menu system can be a little bit confusing as such, but when you do get your head around it, I think you'll find all the right settings in the right places. Better still, it supports Android Auto and Apple CarPlay both wired and wirelessly, which is certainly appreciated. And that couldn't be said about all of its competitors out there, so kudos to Alfa Romeo. Now, as for the driver's display, you have got a fully digitalized 12.3-inch instrument cluster, and here it gives you a pretty good degree of customization, which is certainly appreciated. Of course, it will give you all the key driving information that you require. It is a shame, however, that you do not have a head-up display fitted as standard, which would have overall bolstered the overall safety credentials of this vehicle and kept your eyes planted on the road. Now, aside from this, I would like to point out that there is a 6-speaker audio system that's actually pretty punchy. It does well across the frequency range and will keep a lot of consumers excited. If, however, you want to up the ante, you might want to consider the 9-speaker Harman Kardon audio system, more specifically because it adds a subwoofer in the boot. Now, this is only comprised within the leather and Harman Kardon pack, which will set you back a whopping £2,150. It's a shame that the automaker has not included this Harman Kardon audio system separately, at least not at the time of filming, nor in the UK. Now, in order to attain the best sort of audio fidelity, you'll want to be plugged into the Tonale's system. And here there is a USB Type A and Type C ports. These reside next to a 12-volt socket and also a wireless charging bay, all of which come fitted as standard. As for your rear occupants, you have got a USB Type A and Type C ports, which will provide additional charge. Now, this actually perfectly brings me on to the storage within the cabin. And here you have got the door bins, which will actually suffice because they will fit a 500ml bottle alongside a small to medium sized purse or wallet. Although it's a shame not to see both the front or rear door bins lined in any sort of fabric material. You have also got the glove box, which is actually pretty sizable, and towards the center console, aside from the wireless charging bay, you have got 2 cup holders and actually a pretty sizable compartment found underneath the center armrest. As for the rear, you have got the door bins, but unsurprisingly they're a little bit more limited, and then you've also got 2 cup holders which reside in the pull down armrest compartment. Now, of course, when it comes to storage, we have to talk about its boot capacity. And here you have got an electric tailgate that comes fitted as standard with a hatchback design. As someone who's just under 6 foot, I've got no issues whatsoever accessing the rear of the vehicle. Now, when it comes to practicality, you have got 385 litres and 1,430 litres when the seats are propped down. This is, of course, in the plug-in hybrid model. You've then got a 60-40 rear split folding design, an underfloor compartment which is actually pretty sizable, so for you to stow away your charging cables, and you've also got an integrated ski latch, which is certainly appreciated in order for you to take elongated goods. Although it's worth bearing in mind that when you do prop the seats down, they don't exactly fold flat. Equally, the boot load cover cannot be stored in the underfloor compartment, which is slightly a shame. Now, aside from transporting goods, what about when it comes to giving someone a lift? Well, here I'm actually pleasantly surprised. See, as someone who's just under 6 foot, I don't feel quite hemmed in at the rear of the vehicle. Legroom and headroom are actually not too bad. Yes, it's not going to compete with larger sized SUVs out there on the market, but in the grander scheme of things and for a vehicle of its segment, I think Alfa Romeo should be commended. Furthermore, they've actually reduced the transmission tunnel, so therefore the rear footwell design has actually been optimized for 3 occupants to be sat at the back. Now, as for the seating comfort, is actually pretty good, both at the front and rear of the cabin. The seats themselves are very soft and accommodating, and you'll have no sort of problems. Now, in terms of your adjustments, at the front of the cabin, you have got 6-way manual controls with a 4-way lumbar support for the driver. If, however, you want 8-way electronic controls, you'll have to opt for the leather and Harman Kardon pack at £2,150. This will also add ventilated front seats. If you do want heated front seats with a heated steering wheel, you'll have to go for the winter pack at £450. And equally, if you want some extra light within the cabin, you might want to consider the panoramic roof, which will set you back £1,250. Now, this does perfectly bring me onto its exterior design, and subjectively I would say it's one of the best looking SUVs within its price category and within its segment. Indeed, it has got that Alfa Romeo look at the front with a pointed nose and those very stylish headlights. At the side you have got 18-inch alloys in the TI, 19-inch on the Veloce and 20-inch in the Speciale. You can of course go for an option as well. You then have got a very stylish rear design with a pretty snazzy look with its tail lights. Frankly, over here I've got absolutely no complaints, and I really do love what Alfa Romeo have done over here. Now, in case you're wondering, a red colour finish comes as standard. This is pretty much the same that could be said across the Alfa Romeo range. If, however, you want a solid white or black finish, it'll cost £350, although this is not available in the Speciale trim. And then if you want a metallic blue or grey, it'll cost £700. And as for the exquisite green finish that we have, it'll set you back a whopping £1,500. In case you're also curious, the Veloce trim adds a somewhat blacked out design and a privacy glass with also red red calipers, as you will see pictured, while the Speciale adds a chrome and gloss finish instead. Now, moving past its exterior design, the Tonale is actually very easy to maneuver, and indeed it has an 11.54 meter turning circle. It also has front and rear parking sensors and a rear view camera that all comes fitted as standard. Better still, in terms of your safety credentials, you have got a 5-star Euro NCAP rating, which is certainly appreciated and gives you a bit more peace of mind. Better still, you have got a plethora of driver assistance systems that come fitted as standard across the entire trim range. You have got forward collision monitoring system, intelligent adaptive cruise control, which actually works a treat on the motorway, speed assist, lane support, traffic sign recognition system, and a drowsy warning, all of which are very much appreciated. Better still, if you go for the autonomous driving pack, which will set you back between £1,350 and £1,500, you'll have high-resolution 360-degree cameras, blind spot monitoring system, lateral sensors, and in the more expensive pack, you'll also find park assist. So with all that in mind, it brings us on to our verdict. And here, if you're looking at the Alfa Romeo Tonale, you might seriously want to consider the plug-in hybrid. But what about in comparison to some of the alternatives out there? Well, it's pretty efficient, it's very stylish inside and out, practical too, due to its boot capacity and also the rear occupancy space. And sure, it won't compete with larger sized SUVs, but given its segment, it certainly will suffice. Then you've got the driving dynamics, which are certainly fun, although its engine does provide a bit of a lackluster performance, at least in our opinion. So we'd be curious to know if you would pick the Tonale, or more specifically the Tonale plug-in hybrid, over some of the alternatives out there on the market, or of course if you'd go for a fully electric vehicle instead. Do let us know down in the comments section below. Now, if you've liked this independent detailed review, definitely do consider dropping a like, subscribing and hitting that bell notification, all of which would be greatly appreciated. As such, I've been Chris from TotallyEV, and I hopefully see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves, and goodbye.